Our guest tonight is Mr. Jerry Springer. Mr. Springer is a British-American television presenter. He is the former Democratic mayor of Cincinnati, Ohio, news anchor, actor, and musician. He has hosted the tabloid talk show, The Jerry Springer Show, which celebrates its 25th anniversary this year. Mr. Springer last spoke at the Union in Lent 2012 and has agreed to return to speak at the Union as part of our 200th anniversary year. He will speak tonight on the inevitable trend towards liberalism and the American presidential election. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Jerry Springer.
May you never be on my show. Thank you very much, Emma. That's my only message. First of all, thanks for having me back. Some of you may have been here last year, but I was here last year, and you've obviously got a great university, and yeah, it's kind of a thrill to be here and get to speak about some things. I thought what I'd do is I'll talk for a little bit, and then we'll take questions and get a discussion going, so I'm not just lecturing here. When I speak in the States, well, lately I've been talking about the concept of liberals always win. And oftentimes that gets a stunned reaction because there's a conservative wing in the, certainly within the Republican Party in America and through a portion of the media, cable news for example, where they constantly say America is a center-right country, it's more conservative, and oh, liberals are irresponsible, and they just, you know, when you're young, you're liberal, but when you get older, you become more responsible and conservative, and you preserve things and money, and you're, you know, more careful about those things. Well, it didn't happen to me because I'm old, and I stayed liberal. So you can survive as a liberal, in case you're thinking of coming to America for a little bit. The reason I say liberals always win on a serious note is it is the inevitable consequence of society evolving and going to our basic, good, decent nature. And what I mean by that is, for example, in American history, and it's not much different than yours, just the names are different. In the beginning, when I say liberals always win, in the beginning, for example, conservatives wanted to preserve slavery. And the liberals ultimately won that. It took a long time, but they ultimately won. Conservatives wanted to preserve segregation. The liberals won. Conservatives fought in America against social security. The liberals won. Now, if you talk in America about taking away senior citizens' social security, you're on America. Don't you dare do that. You know, your grandmothers would revolt. Conservatives fight against the environmental movement. Conservatives fight against women's rights. You know, we may wind up now with a woman president. Conservatives have fought against gay rights. Now we have gay marriage in America. So, in the beginning, it always seems like, oh, liberals, they're protesting, what are they doing? But in the end, we ultimately win. And it's not because those of us who are liberal are brighter, smarter, and all that. It's just because we happen to be on the side on what human instincts really are. See, I think basically we're all good, decent people. If we would simply have our politics reflect what our mothers told us in the 3rd grade, we would always do the right thing. Because what does your mother tell you? Share your toys, be nice. If one of your friends needs help, let's help that person. In other words, we always, you know, we don't say, well, I'm not going to help that kid. You know, I got my own toys. You know, we're almost embarrassed about these positions that people take when they're older. I could take, for example, the wealthiest, most right-wing, conservative, Republican guy. He's got a lovely family. He lives in this wealthy neighborhood. And next door to him happens to be another family that doesn't have much money. Maybe they got laid off. They ran into some tough times. So now they don't have much money. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and there's banging on the rich guy's door. And he's in bed with his wife, and, they're asleep, and she says, honey, someone's banging at the door. It's 2 in the morning. He says, oh, my God. So he ambles down the staircase. He opens the door, and standing there in the front door is the next-door neighbor that doesn't have a lot of money, and he's holding his 6-month-old baby. And he's saying, my child's having trouble breathing. Oh, my God, I can't start the car. Could you quickly race me to the hospital? I can't. My car won't start. Please, please. Well, we all know very well that virtually every human being, as this guy, would not say, no matter how rich, how Republican, how conservative, how right-wing he is, he would not say, well, you know what, if you would have worked harder in life, you'd been able to afford a better car that could have started at this time and get your kid to the hospital. So I'm sorry, I'm going back to sleep. And he shuts the door and goes upstairs. Of course that doesn't happen. We all know very well that that guy, regardless of his politics, would act like a normal human being would. You say, oh my gosh, well sure. Honey, I'll be right back. And you grab the keys, even if you're not fully dressed, you get to the car and you race the kid to the hospital. That's what we do as people. So my question is, what happens in life to that guy who acted totally appropriately, caring, compassionate, normal, from that moment to the time he gets to the voting booth, and once he's in the voting booth, well, I'm not voting for those people. Hell, if they would have worked harder, they could have had better jobs. I got everything, I worked for everything I have in life. What turns a person like to be like that? And that happens so often, and it drives me crazy, but it's like, what's wrong with us? Now, you are so far ahead of us here. We're just now starting to see, get close to the idea of health insurance for all Americans. Can you believe that we could be this America and you don't give a damn about Americans? If on 9/11, the most horrific thing that happened in the lifetime of your generation for Americans, in terms of what happened to the country, when the planes ran into the World Trade Center. 3,000 Americans killed. The entire nation, in fact, much of the world. I remember, the French newspaper, whatever the French newspaper is, it said, today we are all Americans. Okay, so everyone felt that. And in America, you can imagine the patriotism, just as when you had the bombing on July 7th. The patriotism is unbelievable. And the people rise up, at least for the first few months, and whatever we have to do, we're going to do. And in America, we said, we will spend whatever it takes. I mean, we started a stupid war. So I'm not saying what you do is rational, but in the beginning, it was whatever it takes. There were no hearings about, excuse me, how much is it going to cost to go into Iraq? You know what? Maybe we ought to raise people's taxes so that we can pay for it. There was none of that. Do whatever you have to do. Just do it. Because these planes ran into the World Trade Center, killing 3,000 Americans. So what I say is this. The odds of anybody leaving this earth because they happen to be in a building that gets hit by a plane is about, 20 million to 1? But the odds of leaving this earth because of a disease or an accident is almost 100%. So if we know what ultimately is going to get us in the end, the real enemy is disease and bad health and stuff like that, why would we not be willing to spend whatever it takes to protect Americans from something they really are going to die from or have a shortened life because of it? In other words, we're not logical. It seems like the only time we get patriotism, and it's similar, not exactly the same in your country, is if the military's involved, then we're all patriots. We're all patriots. If it's a military action, hell yeah. But if it's to make life better and it's not a matter of bombing somebody, then all of a sudden it's, that's expensive. I don't know. I don't want my taxes raised. I don't want to have to do that. The good news is, ultimately, liberalism wins because it's consistent with decent human nature. We really want to do the right thing. I would argue, and by the way, I'm biased, So obviously everything I'm saying is from the perspective of being liberal. So take that into, I'm not standing here telling you that I'm totally objective. I come with a point of view, and it's a liberal point of view. But if we just if we understand that this is what human nature is, this is what the decent thing to do is, you notice a conservative, invariably, whatever they're for, there's always a but. Well, sure, I think everyone should be able to afford health insurance, but it's expensive. I think everyone should be able to afford college education, free college education. Sure, it'd be great if everyone was educated, but there's always a but it's expensive, so maybe we can't do it that way. There's always a but. Instead of saying, this is so important, this is what we're going to do. Now, I would argue, because we both have pretty close to the same political systems, Great Britain and America, the forms are about the same. Obviously, you have a congressional system or a parliamentary system, and we have a presidential system, but that's technical. But we basically have the same concept. And I just wonder why we can't just say that we want a free enterprise system. We want everybody to compete. It brings out the best in people. We want all of that. But there are three things in life that should not be a consequence of how smart you are, who your parents are, what kind of brain you have, how well you can compete. There ought to be three things that you get simply by virtue of being a human being. You should be able to have enough food to eat. You should be able to have a doctor if you're ever sick, or to help you along the way to better health. And you ought to be able to have an education from 2 years, 3 early childhood education, we call it in America. That ought to be guaranteed. Guaranteed. And if it costs money, it costs money. That's the dues you pay for being a part of society. Now, beyond that, we can compete. Some of us will have bigger cars, bigger houses, whatever. But the basics, you should be able to eat, you should be able to get a doctor, you should be able to get educated. That is a guarantee. Now, that's liberalism. And that's worth fighting for. Don't ever be part of sit silently if you're part of a conversation where one of your friends or someone you're around says, I made it, why can't they? Nobody makes it on their own. Nobody. There's not one person in this room that had anything to do with the decision to be born. You weren't involved with the decision to be born. You had nothing to do with the decision to whom you'd be born, in what country, in what era, with what kind of a brain, what kind of health, what kind of environment. That you had nothing to do with. 99% of what we are, we had nothing to do with. So I could take, let's say, Bill Gates, perhaps the most successful American by the standards by which we judge success. Financial, he's brilliant, a great businessman, very compassionate, very charitable, perfect, okay? Bill Gates, boy, what success. If he were born in Ethiopia, he would have been dead at the age of 5. We have 99% of what we are, we have nothing to do with. So, the last 1%, we work hard, we study hard, we try to do the best we can, etc. But never think for a second you made it on your own. That's bullshit. It just isn't true. And I can tell you, there's too much of that going on. And part of that whole thing, well, I made it, why can't they? I'm not paying taxes for that person. I'm not going to do that, And all this, which we're facing, we're having that political battle right now in America with xenophobia. And what people are saying, we don't want the Mexicans coming over here. We're going to, illegal immigrants, get rid of them, etc. You know what? Because a person has a different skin color, do we honestly think they don't love their children? The people that are scrambling to get away from either tyranny, from war, from abject poverty. Who wouldn't do everything they possibly could so you could feed your own children? You know, I'm not saying you don't have to have immigration policies. Of course you do. But if there are people over here, and, you know, in America what the situation is, you've got the kids were born in America, even if sometimes the parents come over illegally. What are you going to do? Send the parents back? And, you know, you go and tell the kid, mom and dad have to leave. Well, one of the parents has to leave. Really? If you knew those people, would you really feel comfortable saying to the child, the 6-year-old child, I'm sorry, your mom came over here illegally, she's got to go? I mean, of course we wouldn't want to say that. If you knew the person, you wouldn't say it. So when you think of your political positions, personalize it. It's amazing how many guys, how many politicians in America had positions on there against gay marriage, for example. Against gay marriage and a lot of gay rights. And then all of a sudden they find out, starting from who used to be the vice president to even a senator from my own state in Ohio, they have a kid who's gay. All of a sudden the position changed. And they openly say in an interview, well, that was my position, but, you know, I love my son, so, and I understand what he's going through, so sure, if he wants to love somebody, he should be able to love someone, marry someone, etc. It always takes, if you know the person personally, then it's okay. Well, our politics ought to reflect what our personal values are. Don't treat other children if you wouldn't do that to your own child. So, good news, liberals always win in the end. But there are battles along the way. And I think, I'm not saying conservatives are bad human beings, of course not. I'm trying to make a point here. But I'm saying we shouldn't be defensive about our liberalism. Nobody is going to hell because you wanted to give someone else a helping hand. You know, nobody's going to hell because of that. And if you are a religious person, and here's another thing which I have trouble. Sometimes the most outwardly religious people, on Sunday morning they're in church, and on Monday morning they go back to work, and it's as if what they learned in church meant nothing. Do you really think under any religious value it's okay that your neighbors are either going hungry or going without medical care or whatever the issue is? I mean, really. You know, so just think about that. Be consistent with the values, the highest values that either your mother taught you or your religion teaches you or whatever it is. And then we'd stop being mean to each other. Wouldn't that be a great political philosophy? The only rule, if you want to serve in political office, is never do something that's mean. It sounds so childish, but it's so human and it's so right. Any questions, comments, disagreements? Yes. Yes, sir. Oh, they need mics because this is being taped.
Thank you. You said that liberals always win. As a British person who watches a lot of American politics and is increasingly worried about gun control, and how it doesn't look like liberals are going to win at all, and in fact it looks like continually conservatives, the NRA, are going to win, and are winning. What do you say to a concerned Brit who thinks that gun control is sort of common sense, and that the American position on gun control is complete nonsense and something needs to change? What are the hopes for it?
Well, first realize how many 150 years we had slavery, discrimination, segregation. So we win in the end. I'm not saying they're not battles along the way. So that's the flippant, quick answer to your question. It takes time. In America, you deal with what you first have as a society. And guns have been very very much a part of America's development. It's a frontier society. It's when we broke away from you guys. I say you guys, I was born in England. But when we, it is a frontier society, so guns are very much a part of it. It's hard to compare British attitudes against American attitudes because it's been a part of our culture. However, and there's also, they give the constitutional argument, the Second Amendment to the Constitution, the so-called right to bear arms. But the Second Amendment clearly says, in order to form a militia, people shall have the right to bear arms. So it's kind of specific in that area. But let's assume that people are never going to give up their guns in America. That doesn't mean we can't have sensible gun legislation. And the example I gave, in fact, this is the only commercial I'll give. Do you guys listen to podcasts? Yeah, I know. Well, anyway, if you just go to jerryspringer.com, because honestly, this is God's truth. As we're driving up here from London this afternoon, this was my latest podcast, and we were listening to it in the car. That's why it's right on my mind. But if you just go, not jerryspringertv.com, because then you get all the show stuff. But if you go to jerryspringer.com, then you hit podcast. There's one on that very issue. And the point I'm making is, when you talk with people from the NRA, what they say is, they worry about any kind of gun legislation because they think ultimately we're going to take guns, the government wants to take guns away from people, which in America is absurd. I mean, why would the government want to take guns away? We elect the government. So any politician that did that, you just vote them out. You don't need to have a revolution, a gun revolution to get rid of the government. You just don't vote them in next time. So, I mean, the whole thing is absurd. Why would the government want to take guns away? So it's not going to happen that way. Then they give the argument, well, cars kill more people than guns. Not true anymore, by the way. But they always say cars, and we don't take, no, but we regulate car safety. So all of a sudden we started to have, when we saw how many people were being killed in the United States in car accidents, which was an incredible amount, we suddenly started to legislate that. And we said, okay, you can have a car, but you're going to have seatbelts. And you're going to have a steering wheel that collapses upon impact. You're going to have airbags. You're going to have, all kinds of safety things put on cars. And the result is that in the last 30 years, deaths from car accidents have dropped 95%. So it worked. So you'll never have legislation in America that will stop all killings or shootings with guns. But you certainly could put some legislation in that will lessen the amount. Let me give you a statistic, and I was amazed to learn this. In the United States of America, every single day, I'll say that again, every single day, 89 on average, which means some days it's a few more, some days it's a few less. 89 people a day are killed by guns in the United States of America. 89 people per day. Now, 260-something are shot every day, but only 89 of them die. So 89 people a day are killed by guns in America. We can do things and will do things because it's moving in that direction where we will have legislation for gun safety, which will reduce the number quite a bit. And when you talk about gun safety, look, if someone wants to go out and kill people, that's still going to happen. You're never going to have a society with no crime. No society in the world exists with no crime. So that is going to happen. But so many people are being killed because there's a gun in the house and a kid grabs it and plays with it, and all of a sudden people are dead in the household. You could stop that. Technology could help, where you either have a chip, the gun owner has to have a personal chip or a fingerprint, just like we do now with the iPhones, that if someone else picks up the gun, it doesn't shoot. It only shoots if the owner has it. So that's one thing for gun safety, for example. There are all kinds of laws, which I'm not smart enough to think of, where you could increase, registration for anyone who wants to buy a gun. Criminal liability for any human being that sells a gun to someone else without evidence of a background check. You could be criminally prosecuted. Well, all of a sudden, you're going to think twice about selling someone a gun without the background check, and there has to be a document of the background check. So there's things we can do without saying we're going to take guns away from Americans, because it isn't going to happen. People living out in the country, for example, they don't feel safe if there's not, if it's not, and sometimes for pretty good reasons. So if we take it in that way, yes, in the end, that point of view will win. It's unfortunate in America that the only time it hits the headlines is when there's a mass shooting, like at a school. Then it hits the headlines. A couple of weekends ago, 18 people were killed by guns in the city of Chicago. You didn't even see it in the newspaper. The only reason I know that is because one of the security guys on my show is a Chicago cop. And he told me about it Monday. He says, holy shit, what a weekend. And, it just happens. It's 89 a year. A day. 89 a day on average killed. So we have to do something. It will happen. And it's not going to happen overnight, but people have had enough. Bob Dylan's line from Blowing in the Wind, how many deaths will it take till we know that too many people have died? Yeah.
You talk about us all ultimately being decent people, but ultimately isn't it about a sense of self-preservation rather than a sense of altruism? And so isn't the game of politics ultimately about appealing to our sense of self-interest rather than our sense of decency?
I think it's you always have those. That's what growing up and socialization is about. We learn how to balance the two. Of course, if it's life and death you want to preserve, but short of life and death, what's the fair thing to do? If you have a nice house, I would like to have your house. That's self-interest. But there's an education that comes and says, wait a second, that's not fair. It's your house, etc. So you're always balancing that. But I think that's how we educate society. And that's what those of us who are liberal, that's the message we have to work at it every day. I am not, boy, I really messed up. If I gave the impression that don't worry about it, liberals will always win, let's go back to sleep. No, you got to fight for it every single day. It's a constant struggle. The civil rights movement, which is how I got started in politics, is a constant struggle. Every day. I just like to give some good news that in the end we will win. Because you never have to be apologetic for your point of view. It is the right thing to do. You don't have to explain to your kid why you voted the way you did. Every kid would understand, well, sure, honey, I voted for that because, it costs us a little more money, but don't you think Johnny should be able to go to a doctor? I keep using that example, which is not that relevant here in Britain because, you have health insurance for everybody. But pick whatever issue you want. I notice right now that a lot of protests going on because college is too expensive. There, it ought to be free education. And we ought to pay for that. And we ought to pay for that. It ought to be. We want all. Why wouldn't you want every kid educated? So that's why. It's a balance. Sure, there's self-interest, but you learn to curb it. in our behavior every day. Why is he going out with her? I want her. Boom. Can't do that. Well, I'll take you and then you. Yes.
To follow up on your question, one might argue that just as we're inherently good, we're also inherently selfish, corrupt, narrow-minded. And also, one would guess that based on everything you've seen through your show, you might not be so optimistic about what side we'll fall on with our behavior. So I'm curious if your experience with the Jerry Springer show somehow made you unexpectedly hopeful about what we'll do, or gave you some ideas on how we can, on a broader scale, change people's behavior to work in favor of our better sides and not our poor sides?
The only thing that I was a grown-up before, I already had grown-up jobs before I ever got the talk show. So I'd already for 10 years been a city councilman and the mayor of Cincinnati, and then for 10 years I was a news anchor. So so whatever views I had in life, or values, I had already developed. So I can't stand here and say, well, this is what I learned from my show. But what my show is a reminder of is we're all alike. Some of us just dress better. Some of us, we're luckier in the gene pool of parents. Some of us were luckier at birth, maybe with a better brain, a more developed brain, or whatever. But we're all alike. We all want to be happy. We all like approval from our friends or whatever, and we all get pissed off when things don't go well. But those who get, like here, you know, you're in the best of all institutions, you get this kind of education. You learn how to control that and have a great presentation of self. Inside, you're burning up. But you learn, you know, maybe you won't use the F word, maybe, you know, you learn how to deal with it. But you can be passively just as aggressive. Maybe the people on our show haven't learned how to be passively aggressive. But the behavior, we are all alike. All I have to do is open up any one of your newspapers. And by the time I get to page 3, I've got 20 shows. And the only difference is, if a famous, wealthy, really good-looking actress, let's say, could do the same things that the people on our show do, slept with someone that she shouldn't have slept with, whatever, used this drug, whatever, and she writes a book about it, and then appears on the late-night shows, and we cheer her when she comes out. We can't wait to buy her next album or see the next movie. These are stars. We love it. We never call these people trash. But if they're not famous, not rich, don't look really good, and don't speak the Queen's English, we flippantly say, that's the trash show. Those people are trash. Really? A human being is trash? It's so hypocritical. The behavior is the same. From presidents on down. Kings on, royal family on down. We're all alike. We all would like to be loved, like to be liked. We'd like to be good. There are moments that we do things we regret, we shouldn't have done. We're human, we shouldn't have done it. But we all muddle through. And so, most of us are lucky enough to have all the trappings of being able to not have it so obvious. Having said that, in the privacy, let's say you take the most esteemed, and I don't want to pick on a professor from Cambridge, so I'll say Oxford. You have a wonderful English professor from Oxford, let's say, and he comes home one evening and finds his wife in bed with the next door neighbor. I promise you that English professor from Oxford would not say, "Forsooth, my dear, what is it that I have found?" He'd say, "Get up!" and grab him, throw everything, punch, scream, yell, run out of that. He'd do everything you see on our show. We're all alike. We really are. That's what I learned from my show. Yeah.
Thanks. In all my years of watching your show when I was home sick from school, you know, it was the only time I could watch it.
You have to be sick to watch my show.
Exactly. That's actually my question's about. I never thought you'd echo the kind of historiography of the great Whig historians of the 19th century and saying that, you know, history is inevitably kind of trending towards progress and liberty. But my question is really about the demographics of your show and your viewership. One of the things that always interested me are the ads that air during your show, at least in the United States. I don't know about here, but it's first, you know, relatively controversial things or topics that are somewhat controversial. One, payday loans, for-profit universities, medical malpractice, kind of ambulance chaser things. I'm just curious. It got me thinking about who, you know, what are the demographics of your viewership? And obviously, all types of people watch your show, but you know, what are the ads you're appealing to? Who's home during the day to be able to watch that? And how does that play into the way your show appeals to them?
I would say, except for young people, which goes against all, I mean, if you're young, it doesn't matter how rich your parents are or how whatever, young people are the core. The show is aimed at high school and college age, so that's the target. But once you get past that age, then I would say the audience tends to be primarily people in the lower half of the economic scale, primarily. So now, who buys commercials? It's not exactly like your system. We are a syndicated show, which means NBC Universal owns our show. I'm an employee of the show. I don't own it, but you know, I'm hired to host it. They own the show. Now, we have 209 television markets in America. So in every single one of their markets, NBC goes in and goes to all the stations there and say, who would like to buy our show? And the one who makes the highest bid buys the show and puts it on their station. So in some markets, we're on NBC, in some markets on the CW, sometimes CBS, sometimes ABC, whatever. Then that local station goes out and gets sponsors. Well, as is done with all commercial television, potential sponsors look at what your audience is. And if you think about it, trade schools, a lot of the people, first of all, if you're home during the day, the chances are, it's a good chance you don't have a job, or you don't have a job during the day or whatever, or maybe you'd like a better job, so trade schools work. So if you look at the demographic of our audience, those are the, you know, the clients, the sponsorship that goes on. And obviously, I have no idea from market to market who's buying our show in a given month. You know, I have no idea. But I think overall, you're right, it's probably that.
Can you just speak a little bit how that might appeal to the show itself? I mean, does it have any impact on the way you conduct your show?
No.
Or what you do? I mean, why do you think...
First...
Why do you think they're airing it at 2 p.m. as opposed to 8 p.m. when more people are home?
Why the show is...
Yeah, I mean, it's a strategic decision to be able to do that.
Well, first of all, a lot of stations want to run the show during school hours so the kids don't watch. You know, I mean, it depends on the market. If it's a very conservative community, they'll run it during the day. They want to run it because the show makes money. So, you know, they can give all the fancy speeches they want, that show. But they've been we're now on for 25 years, which is the longest running talk show like ever. So they make money at it. That's why they're running it. And then they figure out what's a good time where they won't get that much complaints. Plus, we're not a prime time show. So we would never be prime. We could be late night, you know, when they don't have to worry about kids watching. It's 2 in the morning, and, you know, so that's fine. So they make those decisions about when they're going to run it. What the audience is has absolutely nothing to do with what show we put on. Oh, there's something I should tell you. I never know what the show is going to be. I'm not allowed to know. So you be carrying around the card all the time, but all the card has on it are the names of the guests, because I don't know who they are, so they give me a name there. And that's why at the beginning of every segment, I always say, so what's going on? And then they tell the story, and my job is to ask questions that you would ask sitting at home, and then make jokes. So, but I'm never allowed to know what the show is. If I knew what the show was about, I wouldn't even come in. You know, who wants to watch that? It's stupid. But really, I never know what the show is about. So there's no influence there at all. The rule of the show is they're only allowed to air things that are either dysfunctional, outrageous, or inappropriate. So if you call us with a warm, uplifting story, they're not allowed to run it because, we have deals with the stations. We have to send you to another show, and the producers are given a list of what other shows you send it to based on what the subject matter is. But we're a circus. We're only allowed to run those things which are crazy. So I can't go in each day and say, this is too crazy, we can't run it. It'd be like if I were a judge, I couldn't say, I don't like criminals, don't send me any crimes. If you're a judge, that's your job. Well, if you're a talk show host on a show that is about outrageous behavior, I can't then complain that, gee, this is outrageous. Yes?
You say your interest in politics first started during the Civil Rights Movement in America. I was just wondering how that affected your political views at the time and how you think the Civil Rights Movement affected other young people in America during the time.
What's the first part? I'm sorry. It's not your fault. I'm learning
Sorry,
the accent.
just the fact that you said the Civil Rights Movement in America is what got you interested in politics. And I was just wondering how that affected you.
Oh, okay. Well, a 3-sentence background on me. My family was exterminated in the concentration camps of Nazi Germany. And the reason I was born in England is my mom and dad literally got out of Germany the first week in August of 1939, which was 3 weeks before September 1st, before Hitler went into Poland to start World War II. So the rest of my family was all exterminated, but mom and dad got out, got here to England. They were, according to the, visa numbers, it was like they were the 88th and 89th last people that got out of Germany before Hitler went into Poland, which started the war, and then the gates went down and no Jews could leave anymore. So, talk about luck, about being here and everything. That experience, and then I was born in England, and then when I was 5, we came to America. But that family experience, embedded liberalism in me forever, because I realized if you teach, one day you have kids, the one thing you will teach them, or must teach them, I would say, is you never, ever, ever judge a person based on what he or she is, but only on what he and she does. So therefore, because 6 million Jews were put to death, not because of anything they did, they just happened to be Jewish. So that made me a liberal from day one. It got me involved in civil rights because everything at the time that people were saying about blacks, they had been saying about Jews. Just put in another name. Whatever the group is that's being discriminated against, people have all these stereotypes, and it's just horrible. I don't care what your religion is, where you came from. It doesn't matter. Now, if you behave badly or treat me badly or something like that, then I'm going to have negative views, but not because of based on what you are. That's what got me into civil rights. And civil rights movement was just a continuation of the value I had been raised with. So it wasn't like that got me to be a liberal. I was born a liberal, you couldn't look at the pictures on my family wall and be anything but a liberal, I really believe that. That's DNA. Yeah. Oh, the gentleman right here. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'll get both of you. I'll get you next.
So on the Facebook event page, it said you were going to have comments on the presidential election. I was just curious what that was. Like, what's the deal with Ben Carson and Trump? Are you feeling the burn? Like, do you think that Hillary Clinton is the inevitable Democratic candidate? Does she fit your profile because she's not really a liberal individual? She's more moderate. What your definition of liberalism being inevitable? So what's just your general take?
On the election? Donald Trump and Ben Carson, they're not going to wind up being president, so it's not going to happen. famous last words. Burn the tape if they get to be president. You know, I always joke around because I'm so political, and in the States, if they don't know that I was born in England, you know, a reporter will always ask, well, would you consider running against Trump? Because they figure, oh, reality television, you know. And I've said that if I ran against Trump for president, then there really would be a crisis at the border. And they'd have to build a wall to keep Americans in, because everyone would be wanting to flee the country if the choice was Trump or me. Trump's not going to be president. And the reason they're having this success now, early on, first of all, it's a year away, so this is the time to have fun. You know what I mean? It's not a serious consideration. People aren't really saying, do we really want his finger on the button? You know, that's the great metaphor in American politics. Growing up, you know, in the Cold War era, in the end, you can have any political view you want, but the guy or woman who has their finger on the button to blow up the world better be stable. And, or better not, you know, be confrontational or whatever. I mean, that's always a serious question. So they're not going to get to be the president. And frankly, it wouldn't be the Democrats that stop Trump. In the end, it'll be Republicans. The establishment would literally back away. And I think they would ultimately, they may not say so publicly, but very quietly they would be supporting Hillary, who I think will be the Democratic nominee. You know, because they'll say, all right, we'll wait for the next election to beat her, but in the meantime, this isn't going to. And same with Ben Carson, his demeanor is wonderful, but some of the stuff he says is nuts. And once America really figures it out, you know, you don't run for president by saying, by the way, first thing I'm going to do is take away Medicare. Excuse me. So that's not good. Now, but why are they so popular right now? And they are. And by the way, Trump is smart. And it's nothing personal. I don't like his politics, but I'm not, you know, it's not, I want to get Trump. Americans, and here's where our system is a little different than yours. As I understand it, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, you can't have political commercials until a few weeks before your election. In America, there are no restrictions. So literally, anyone growing up in America in the last 40 years has been inundated for almost every day of their life with television commercials, and in fairness, both sides, Democrats as well as Republicans, local elections as well as national, where the other person, the opponent, is some sleaze bucket, criminal, pervert, will raise your taxes, will do horrible things. And so everyone grows up in the country believing that anyone in politics is corrupt or horrible. And then we wonder in America why people don't vote. Why people just say, oh, you know, I don't care. And eventually that was going to build up into such disrespect for our, and now you have cable news, some of the stations who make a living on attacking Barack Obama. And so you just feed that every single day for year after year after year. There's such an anti-government feeling that it was inevitable that at some point you would get people that are not part of the government suddenly becoming popular. And their credential is only that they haven't been in Washington. Now, the absurdity of electing someone who's never been in Washington, you know, I would never go to a surgeon who never went to medical school. Why would you choose the leader of this massive government that has to govern 320 million people and choose someone that's never run a government before? I mean, it's insane. Forget political philosophy, just sheer competence. You could be the nicest person in the world, but you wouldn't have a clue of what to do, how to... And by the way, success in business does not translate to success in government. In fact, it's counterproductive because you're in business to make a profit. You're in government to provide a service. Totally different objectives and therefore different means of getting there. So someone who is in fact, when I think of the American presidents, the last businessman we had as a president was Hoover. And hey, that turned out well. So, no, you know, when you come and say, I've been a CEO, I can be president right away, you check off the list, no. If you have no government experience, you do not run for the top job. You know, start in a lower office, build some experience. You've got skills at being a CEO, but you've never run a government, so learn about government before you start spotting off some of these things. I mean, look, I love Hillary Clinton. And so, you know, I start off with that bias. You know, I think she'd be great as president. But I think one thing you could objectively say, even if you disagree with her positions, is America, I don't think there is ever, certainly we'll take the 20th and 21st centuries. I can't think of one person who was as prepared, as knowledgeable about what the world is and what the government does, running for president as she is. Now, once you become president, you learn. But seriously, do you think any human being can sit down with Hillary Clinton and talk about any country in the world, any issue in the world, that she doesn't know more than you do? I mean, it's just, and because of her experiences. I mean, talk about having that in your DNA. Now, that's one of the things people don't like about her, because she's been lifelong. But, you know, you're in the White House for 8 years. You've been a United States Senator. You've been Secretary of State for 4 years, so you know every world leader, every form of government, all the behind-the-scenes dealing, whether it's on an email or not. But you know where all the bodies are. Think of the wealth of knowledge this person has. Talk about being ready on day one. We've never had that. So, you know, I think you can objectively say, boy, is she qualified. Now, the debate can be whether you like her positions. I happen to like her positions, which is why I, you know, go over the top of her. Look, I like Bernie Sanders' position too. But I see how the Republican Congress, and the Congress will stay Republican with the next election because of the way the district lines are drawn. Without getting too technical, more people vote for a Democratic congressman or congressperson than a Republican one. But because of the way they drew the lines of the congressional districts, they piled all the Democrats into a very few number of districts. So therefore, most of the Congress people happen to be Republican, even though most people vote for Democrats. It's just that they piled all the Democrats into one. It's called gerrymandering. I resent that they used my name to do it. So with the Republican Congress, seeing how they deal with Obama, good Lord, if they deal with someone who says, I'm a socialist, nothing will get passed, so nothing will be done. So even if I like a lot of his positions, you know, I have to say, well, no, not for president. So.
Oh, hi. Yes, love your show, love you, great. I'm a big fan of Barack Obama too. I have like his Hope poster on my wall, and I get so caught up in the whole Americanism, and there's a lot of patriotism in America. I can tell you're a patriot and you love America, but would you say that America is the greatest country in the world?
Did you watch, that's the line from House of Cards. Did you ever watch that? Or was it Newsroom?
Yeah.
Did you watch Newsroom? Because
Yes, I've seen that,
yeah,
yes.
a student stood up and asked that same question.
Exactly.
So all of a sudden, yeah, you plagiarized. Okay. For what I like, I am, for me, it's the greatest because I'm living there and I love the opportunities that America has given me, and I think if you're going to have one superpower in the world, I'm very happy that it's America and not some of the other countries that have been superpowers in history. Certainly in the countries now that would have competed for it, like during the Cold War. Look, America makes a lot of mistakes. But in the end, we kind of come, like it took us a long time to get into World War II. But eventually we come out on the right side and do the right thing. And just like I say, in the end, liberals, in the end, we do the right thing. It takes us time to get there. because we're a very boisterous, loud, uncontrollable mass of freedom. And it's not, democracy is not neat. You know, so you can give everyone the right to vote. It doesn't mean they're always going to vote very smartly. But yeah, so the answer to the question, yeah, I'm very satisfied. But you know, if I was from France, I'd probably say France is the best country in the world. You know, you love where you're from. And I don't have too many, you know, I think the only negative about America has been its dealings on race. But otherwise, I would say I love the freedom, I love the opportunities. It certainly was instrumental in my family existing. Although, God bless Winston Churchill, he saved our lives, so, you know, he was the greatest politician in my lifetime. But yeah, I'm very happy with America, but it's not a contest, you know. I love being in America, and I think America mostly does the right thing. And we make mistakes. But when we make mistakes, eventually we get out. Iraq, Vietnam, way too late. But even Vietnam, I could say, we weren't smart, but we went in for relatively good reasons. I mean, it wasn't in your lifetime, but communism was not a good thing. Okay, and the Iron Curtain was doing horrible things to its people, and it did. Recognizing bad things that could happen in America, believe me, there was a reason that they had to build a wall in East Germany to stop them from going to West Germany. They weren't putting up the wall so because West Germans were running into East Germany. There's a reason for that. So communism was bad, and it's a reason it doesn't exist or hardly exists anymore. And so America went in originally because they thought, oh my gosh, if we don't stop it, they're going to try to take over the world. And the truth is, that was their objective. They did try to spread communism around the world. So I think there was a legitimate reason. But we were foolish for going into Vietnam because we didn't see the end game. Same thing with Iraq. We knew, or any wise person should have known, that whenever we left Vietnam, it would then turn communist, because it's in the backyard of Russia and China, or at the time the Soviet Union and China. So obviously it was going to be communist. So if we knew it was going to wind up communist anyway, why did all these people die in the interim? So it never, you know, there never was an end game to that war. And going into Iraq, stupid decision. And it wasn't because, gee, we turned out to be wrong, they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. My argument was, wait a second. Thank God the administration was wrong. What if the administration had been right? What if Iraq did have weapons of mass destruction? What the hell are we doing bombing a country that has weapons of mass destruction and we don't know where those weapons are? Is that crazy? What if he did have it? He could have blown up the entire Middle East. So it was the dumbest decision. So I'm not one of those that says, oh, the administration was lying and all this. I hope they were lying, because if they were telling the truth, that is the worst decision that has ever been made in American history. To start a war against a country that has weapons of mass destruction and you don't know where those weapons are. I mean, geez, what were they thinking? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I was just going to ask, I found out a couple of days ago that there was some controversy in America about Republican candidates and congressmen being members of the Ku Klux Klan. There's a scandal about it.
About being members of the Ku Klux Klan?
Yeah.
Yes.
Would you say that racism on that sort of political level is a real major problem within the political system? Or do you think it's more of a controversy at the moment?
Well, the overt racism of the Ku Klux Klan is not a threat to America. It just isn't. The more dangerous discrimination or bad attitudes on race is the polite racism. It's the neglect. It's the not recognizing that there really is a double standard. Look even at the issue of people being stopped by the police. And virtually any African American that you speak to in America has, and you tell your kids about it, don't be running late at night. If you see a police car, don't be running if you see a police car, just stop. Never have any time, in other words, you go through this speech, which suburban white families never even think about. So it isn't like the white family is sitting there saying, I hate blacks. It's that we never even think about it because we don't have that experience. We haven't experienced that fear. I think it's impossible for a white person to understand what a black person, let's say in America, and it could be in England too, I don't know, so I won't speak about it here, what they're feeling, what they're thinking. Because, do they know that no matter how polite we are when we're facing them, that even when whites are talking to each other and you see a black person sitting at another table in the restaurant, if you're making some reference, even if it's a nice reference, you kind of whisper, he's black. It's that kind of, it's a mindset. It's a mindset of thinking that, whoa, that's different. And we can't know that. We don't know that every time you leave work, even though the people at work were very nice to you, you're going back to your neighborhood, they're going to their neighborhood. It's a separate, you never feel like you really belong. And I think that builds up a resentment that in young people that have crappy lives because they are living in either abject poverty or drug-infested gangs, whatever, you add that resentment to it, and then you wonder why there's violence or why, they're out of control or not polite or whatever. So I think race is a very difficult issue that we have not come to grips with. But I wouldn't worry that it's because somebody once was a member of the Klan. The Klan is, it's silly now. It's not, they hate, but it's not a big enough group to have any influence at all. So that's not the word. It's not the Klan. Polite racism is much more dangerous. Not because it's not malicious. We don't even know we're doing it. How often do you hear a white person say, boy, he's a well-spoken black? When do you ever say to another white person, boy, he's well-spoken? But if it's a minority, or the Mexican who in America, is cleaning the lawn, what a polite young man. You just assume if it's a white kid from the suburbs, his parents probably told him, have good manner, whatever. It's that subtle, and I don't know if racism is the right word because it gets people so angry when you say the word racism. But I'll say it's a subtle neglect based on an insensitivity that we're not even aware about. Aware of, yes. Oh, is someone? Oh, yes, sir.
So going back to your comments on how liberalism always wins, looking back on history, it seems like majorities of society have always been in the wrong, and then that ends with a movement or a war. So slavery, civil rights movement, now it looks like liberals are winning the gay rights movement. In 50, 100 years, what do you think those people will look back today and say, what were those people thinking? Is it animal rights? Is it nationalism? What do you think we're missing today as a society that we, as a majority, agree on that in the future liberals will win?
Well, race will be much less important 50 to 100 years just because of all the intermarriage. I mean, it's getting more and more difficult to figure out exactly what race you are because mom or my grandfather was this and my grandma, you know, as we become so much more mobilized as a planet, you know, so I think that'll be one change. And they'll wonder what, you know, just like right now we don't make differences between someone who's blonde and someone who's brunette. You know, they'll say, you mean because the skin was a different shade? I mean, we're all a combination, you know. So that's the one thing. And the other thing is, I believe nationalism will be less important 50 years from now because of technology, where the boundary lines are become less and less relevant. I would say in Europe, it's far more tribal now than nationalistic. And people are starting to feel a more relationship to someone of their own, let's say, a religion or their own ethnic group than they are necessarily to the nation. Because more and more people are living in countries that they weren't born in. And so I think that's going to be, you know, they'll wonder. For example, in America, the demographics are changing. In 10, 15, maybe 20 years, Caucasian will be a minority in America. Most Americans will either be African American, Hispanic, or some other nationality initially. So, you know, that's going to change, and therefore, so that's what I think it'll be 50 years from now. National lines will be less significant, and race will be less significant. Yes?
Hi, my name is Max. I'm an international student from Canada, and I'm a law student as well, so I studied some public international law and found out quite a few things about some geopolitical decisions that leaders of countries like America and Canada have to make in vetoing certain decisions on the international arena. On the first part of my question is about, again, you said liberals win. As you know, Justin Trudeau just recently became a prime minister in Canada. So that's one plus. How would you comment what's your take on America and Canadian collaboration and relationship and the whole geopolitical situation with Middle East and Russia at the moment? Would you be able to say what the future holds and what your personal take on this is?
The first part's easy. America and Canada, you know, culturally we're all the same. So there's a boundary that, and I'm not saying people don't have pride being Canadian, you don't want to be swallowed by America, but you watch the same television, you speak the same language, you know, it's the difference is pretty much like the difference between Ohio and Michigan. You know, it's like a state line. So I don't see very much difference there. The relationship will be good, and it will always be good because there's no reason for it not to be. That's an easy one. And then you said between America and Russia? Oh. Well, America and Russia aren't going to go to war, and they will dance around on various issues, but there's also common interest, and the common interest is everyone's scared of terrorism. So ultimately that will force nations to be somewhat responsible. And we've even seen that in the Middle East, where countries that normally weren't getting along with each other suddenly are willing to make deals, you know, let's say to deal with ISIS or whatever. So, you know, people want to survive. At least nations want to survive. So nations will do things to, you know, even if they have to deal, you know, the United States and the Soviet Union during World War II. You know, it wasn't like Stalin was this wonderful humanitarian. But America did business with Stalin because we had to beat Hitler. And so that will always be the case. I don't see Russia obviously it'd be nice to have better relations. I think right now Putin is a hero in Russia, but that will last only so long as the economy holds. Because if his foreign policy is such that Russia continues to pay a price, whether it's with sanctions or just oil no longer being purchased, then he's not going to be so popular. And but I'm not pessimistic about where that's ultimately going. You know, there are limits to Russia. I think Europe will at some point band together and stop him from creating another Crimea, or what he did in the Ukraine. So I don't panic about that. I think right now, obviously, terrorism, just this week, obviously, with the plane that went down, it's serious. We haven't figured out yet what the right response is. When you're dealing with terrorists, where do you bomb? Terrorists are some guy sitting in his room with his computer and communicating and getting hold of a weapon or whatever and sneaking it on something. Bombing isn't going to, you kill their leaders, they get another leader. So that is not a problem that has been solved, but nor is it something that will topple a government. It doesn't mean that there won't be terrorist acts. But, Britain or America are not going to lose its government because of a horrific terrorist act. The government won't. That's why they're terrorists. They don't think they can take over government, so they try to influence policy by doing terror is fear, by doing all these acts and things, disrupting, but not overthrowing. Assad may be overthrown, but it's not going to be because of terrorism, it's because of what he does to his people. So now, how do you get on my show? Don't. Yeah, well, why don't we take 3 more questions and then we'll call it a night. Yes? Someone get some of mine. Why don't we do it into the mic just because they're taping this so you can be heard.
Would you say that your Jewish heritage and values have had any impact in how you conduct your show and your approach to politics?
Well, as I said before, my Jewish heritage, because of our experience, obviously has an impact on my political philosophy of being a liberal, etc. So yes, total. That's where we get our value system. And we each have something in our lives which gives us our value system. With me, it happens to be that. The influence on the show, none. The show, look, I enjoy doing the show. It's fun. And honestly, that's the reason I do it. I'm 71 years old. I'm lucky in life. I don't need to work to make a living anymore. I honestly just keep doing the show because it's fun to do. I mean, think of it like this. I could go out and have dinner with anyone in the world, and if I then sit down and have to, let's say you and I are going out to dinner, and I will ask you, how was your day? Let's say you already were out of school and you had a job. And you will tell me about your day. You'll say, well, it was a tough day at the office, but this funny thing happened at the water cooler. And we'll say, oh yeah, that was funny. And then you'll say, Jerry, how was your day? And I'll say, I had this guy who married a horse. So I'm always going to have the better story. So it's like, it's the most fun job you can imagine. But the show has no purpose. It's a 1-hour escape from what's going on in your life. And it gives people who want to go on and yell about something a chance to do it without any censorship. I mean, we'll bleep out the bad language. you know, and blur out any nudity or something like that. American standards are different than the ones you have here in Britain. But, you know, other than that, that's all. I always say the show is chewing gum. In other words, it doesn't do any good, but it's not going to kill you. So, okay, who else? Yes.
Why do you think there's so much more hostility in America to things like universal healthcare in comparison to somewhere like Britain, where the majority of people are sort of for it, whereas in America there's obviously quite a lot of hostility?
They're part of the culture of the whole development of America in the first place is individual freedom. We're the frontier. We're going to do it ourselves. It is this mentality. It's why you have guns. I'm on the frontier. I'm going to protect myself. I don't need the government. Just leave me alone. Don't take my money. Don't make regulations for me. And this is, so the idea of the government being in charge of our lives, except for national defense, is instinctively, I'd rather be able to do it myself. And so that's the culture you're dealing with. So it's taken many years for us to fight to expand health insurance, And finally, thank you, Barack Obama, we now have pretty close, not there yet, to everyone having health insurance. But we still have to compromise on it, which drives me crazy. You know, we ought to have what we call single-payer health insurance. We have Medicare, anyone 65 and over. It works wonderfully. I think we could have, instead of going through all this fight over the legislation, just changed one sentence in the Medicare laws where it says you have to be 65, say you have to be 1 day old. Medicare for everybody. Same system, no new, but the Republicans in Congress wanted they represent private insurance companies. And they don't want to lose that business. So, you know, the only compromise was, okay, we'll say people have to buy it through private companies, but private insurance companies. So it's still free enterprise, but everyone has to have it. And if you can't afford it, we'll subsidize it, but everyone has to have it. So that's how they wait. It's a crazy way to do it. It's much more complicated, much more errors are being made, dissatisfaction, because from state to state it goes crazy. It would have been so much simpler just to say everyone qualifies now for Medicare. One sentence, we could have done it. But again, it's cultural as to why it's different than in England here, where you've just had it. And I'm glad you have it. Final question. Yes.
Hello. Sorry. Hi. You said previously before the talk that there was kind of a professionalization of politics, which you didn't endorse. But then afterwards you say that it's more beneficial to have Hillary Clinton because of her experience and like the fact she's been a senator, etc. Is there a tension between those two aspects, and like what level of political experience is it good to have in that situation?
You can be in politics as long as you want, just don't ever view it as a career. Don't ever let that be the means of how you support or have to support your family. Obviously, Hillary Clinton has made a lot more money outside of politics than in. But I'm not objecting to someone devoting their life to it. But when I think of career, I think in terms of this is what I'm going to do, this is how I make my living, this is how we're going to live. And what I told you in the interview before the show, one of the reasons politics becomes dishonest, it becomes intellectually dishonest before it ever becomes financially dishonest. And what I mean by that is, if you're making your living by the salary you get running for office, then you have to win the next election because you have to feed your family. You're 45 years old, you've been in office for 20 years, and oh my gosh, if I lose the next election, I'm out of work, and I'm 45, it's going to be hard to find another job. I won't find a job at this salary. What are we going to do? So all of a sudden, you start compromising your positions, Not because it's a good idea to compromise that position, but because you want to get reelected. And so you're no longer saying what you really believe. You're saying what you have to do to feed your family, which is an understandable pressure. But that makes politics dishonest. And that's why you have all these politicians saying whatever they have to say to get elected, because their career is more important than anything else. That's why I don't want politics to be a career. See, I would argue for Hillary Clinton, it's a passion. It's not a career. She certainly doesn't need the job. So I don't, and secondly, it's different than when you run for president, you ought to have experience in government. That doesn't mean, that's a separate issue of whether or not you should be a career politician. I want you to have some experience so that you know what you're doing when you take over the largest, biggest government in the world. Thank you so much for having me.